Hello and welcome back to my 5-part tutorial on alignments, profiles, and grading. This is going to be part 4, which is feature line grading. In this video I'm going to be talking about Civil 3D sites, an explanation of feature line grading, feature line editing tools, a couple do's and don'ts and tips when working with doing feature line grading. And then I'll go over a couple of examples and kind of thought processes with feature line grading. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Civil 3D sites. So in past videos I went over them and discussed them, but didn't go into detail or explain what they were. So Civil 3D sites are used to collect and group together similar Civil 3D objects. So the best way I could explain it is, or that I could think of explaining it, would be if you're doing the design for a new housing development and you have a bunch of different parcels or properties that each one has grading that's independent from the next, but overall it's going to be the same. And it'll all have to work together to make one final finished grade surface. What you can end up doing is creating sites for each one of those parcels so that you can add feature lines or grading or corridors or whatever else that you need for each one of those properties, and the sites will keep them separate but also be the same. So you can add the sites, feature lines and grading objects and alignments to one finished grade surface, but they won't interact with each other while you're working on grading. So if you have two feature lines that are touching at a certain point and they're on different sites, nothing will happen. But if they're on the same site, then they're going to want to grab elevations from one another, and they'll interact in a very weird way. You tend to get a lot of weird issues with your surface when you have two feature lines crossing that are on the same site. So that is a basic explanation. When you're creating a feature line, you have the option of selecting the default one. So I'll quickly make one just to show. So I'll, again, just as a quick review, to create a feature line, I generally create them from objects. So I'll click that button there, select the polyline that I want, I hit enter, and the first option is sites. So by default, if you have not created one yourself, created a site yourself, then by default Civil 3D will make site 1. And that'll always exist in the drawing. It's just something that Civil 3D creates by default. You can create your own, or in this case, if you've already created a bunch of them and you already have line work and feature lines that are on these sites, you can actually do this, click this drop down and select it from your drawing. If you know that this one specific parcel you want to add more feature lines to, or more grading objects, or another alignment, or anything, you can select that specific parcel. So that'll put that feature line on that site. So the other way to see what sites you have in your drawing is through tool space. You'll see in this list of objects there is sites, and again by default you get site 1, and you can see all of these objects that can be grouped together. You can group parcels, you can group grading groups, feature lines, and alignments. And I believe with this you could do profiles as well, but I'm not too sure. I do not typically put sites with profile views or profiles. So that is Civil 3D sites. Super helpful when you need to use it. I don't use it often, but there are times where I have had to use it. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is a brief explanation of feature line grading. So I'm going to quickly draw a rectangle. So this is the same drawing that I've been working with. The only difference is the line work from my actual site. I have moved it to a separate drawing and now XREF'd it into this drawing here. So I'm going to create this rectangle here just as a way to further explain it. So imagine this red box is a piece of paper. When we're doing feature lines, adding it to our finished grade surface as a break line, those break lines are going to represent a fold in our piece of paper. So we go through and we draw this yellow line here being the lip of gutter. We draw that, we give it an elevation, we give it slopes, we add it as a break line. That is now a fold in our finished grade surface. Next we go through and we do the front face of the curb, and we have our one face and then our like the bottom face of the curb, and then we have our top face of the curb, and then we have our back of curb, top back of curb. Each one of those will be a fold, and with when you combine all of those folds into one finished grade surface, it will then give you a surface. It'll show your surface as you want it to be. So I'm not going to go through and do a big explanation of grading all of this site that I have drawn here, but I'm going to show you a small section of it. So I'm going to go from the beginning of these curb lines to this white line here and show you. I'll create the feature lines and I'll walk through the steps of the feature line editing tools, give you some do's and don'ts within there and some tips, and then I'll go through some more examples afterwards. So to start out, I'm going to go ahead and quickly, what I'll do, I'm going to do a nested copy really quick to get all of my objects in here, and then let's do intersection, and I'll select here and go perpendicular, and then I'm just going to go ahead and trim off the ends of those just so I have my my lines that I want to do. So I'm going to work with these lines themselves. So what I'll do for now is XREF. I'll go ahead and unload my my site drawing, my site XREF, and I'm going to go ahead and create some feature lines. So the nice thing with creating feature lines from objects is that you can create more than one at a time. So you just select all the objects you want to make into feature lines, hit enter, and this window will pop up like we've discussed before. And I'll go ahead and do create new just so we could walk through how to create a new site. So I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it feet for feature lines, grad for grading. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So now you have that created. By default, it puts it on C-topo-feet. And then, again, I'm going to make sure that I have erase existing entities selected. And you can see that if I highlight all of those, you just see I have 3 different feature lines. I don't have any other lines there, but they're all the same color. So that is sometimes a little difficult to work with because it's all one. So what you can do is you can change the style of it, and these are all default feature line styles that is default with Civil 3D. So each one sometimes has different colors, some of them don't. But in this case, I'll just select random ones, so we have 3 different colors. And let's quickly edit this style just to change the color. I'm going to change it to red. So let's start off with editing tools. So to start off, when we're creating elevations, not going to go into details on labels for surfaces, but I'll just go ahead and just show quickly place a couple just so I know my elevations here. Don't like that. Give me just a second. So I get, I'm going to just start off with one elevation. So my elevation at this point of my lip of gutter is 5,246.06. So ideally, if this is in your road and you're trying to connect to an existing road, you're going to want to match that elevation and kind of work your way up your site or through your site. So when you select a feature line, it shows up with this new tab that'll be highlighted in blue called Feature Line, and it gives you all this list of tools. I'm not going to go through every single one of these tools, but I'm going to show you the ones that I have used often and find very helpful. So I'm going to start off with editing the geometry. So like I've discussed in prior videos, PI stands for point of intersection, or in this case, points of intersection. And that would be similar to a vertex on a polyline. But in this case, with a point of intersection, that is where you can have an intermediate elevation value within your feature line. Whereas a regular polyline, you just get a start and end is one total elevation. So adding that, you can see that as soon as I click that button, I get these two yellow lines, and that kind of tracks where my cursor is. It's going between existing PVIs. So I'll go ahead and type mid to get my midpoint. And it is not wanting to do it. Let me turn on my midpoint object snap. And then it's asking, so I select that point and it's asking me for an elevation. For now, I'm going to select 0. And when you add PIs, you get the option to add them at an increment or a distance apart. So those will show up in your command line down below. And you can do either one of those however you would like, but that's just, in this case, that's not something that I'm going to do. So the next tool that I'm going to show you is actually editing the elevations of it. And I'll quickly walk through. So if you want to delete one of these points of intersection, you could select that and just hover over one of the vertexes and it'll delete it. You can break a feature line. So if you wanted, so this would be similar to either the break or break at point for polylines. So I could basically select break for this point here, and it'll create two separate feature lines. So I have trim, so I could trim it off, join, reverse the direction. I could smooth it out, fit to curve. I could add a fillet to it. I can edit the curve, so if I want to change the radius of my curve, I can do that. I can weed the points, so remove unnecessary points. I can do a stepped offset, and then insert points at crossing locations. So this goes along with crossing feature lines, and this will be one of my points of do's and don'ts. Whenever possible, do not cross polylines. You could have not polylines, feature lines. You can have a feature line end at a PI point, but you do not want it to cross a feature line. This is one of those tools. I have not used it because I just go about my feature line grading knowing that I don't want anything to cross. But if you do happen to have them, you can use this to add a PI at those points. So we'll go over this here shortly for editing elevations, or I guess I'll start now, but we'll do edit elevation editor. So what this elevation editor, it brings up panorama, and it, similar to an alignment, it gives you stationing of it. So it doesn't display the station numbers, but it on the feature line like it does with alignments. But it does have stationing assigned to your feature lines. And you can see this green triangle here for each one of these. That represents, each green triangle represents one of these triangles on our feature line. And it'll give you the elevation, the length, the grade back, grade ahead. And this is a very similar window to profile editing tools, or profile editor to see that. And we have some buttons here. You could raise and lower your elevations. You can raise incrementally, so raise as you go throughout each one of the PIs. But you could make it relative to a surface. You can do all sorts of things. And I encourage you to go through and experiment with these and just kind of play with them. There's really not much that you can do to mess it up. If anything, you just undo and you're good. So I'm just going to explain how to work with Elevation Editor. I'm going to do it for these first 2 points, and then I'll show you another way to edit them for the next 2 points. So to start off, I'm going to go ahead and select it. And if you go through your list and you select each one of these lines, it'll highlight with this green triangle which station it is and which PVI point or PI point that you're selecting. So this is my first one that I have a known elevation for. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 5246.06 because I want the start of my curb and gutter to match existing grade. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in, and you can see that now it is trying to grade it, set a slope, a percent slope from this point down to 0, and it automatically filled that in. So that is a negative 17,795.95% slope. Kind of crazy, not necessarily what you would want. So based on my knowledge of this site, I know that everything is kind of flowing this direction, so it slopes downhill through this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do grade back, and I'll select that list. And let's say I want it to be a negative 1.5% slope. So I'll type in negative 1.5, hit enter, and now you can see that this elevation here is now assigned. So adding a percent slope here changes the elevation of the next point when you do grade back in this case, or if it's reversed, it'll be grade ahead. And let's say I like this elevation a little bit better than I like this elevation. I can now select grade ahead and I'll do 1% slope. And now it is a positive 1% slope from this point to this point, or vice versa, negative slope from here back. So that is Elevation Editor. This was kind of the first way that I learned how to do feature line grading. And now at this point, it is my least favorite way of doing it. I do use it quite frequently, but it is just more time consuming to do it this way, in my opinion. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. So now that we have those created, these two elevations at least created, I'll show you another way to go through and edit the elevations. So in your Edit Elevations panel, we're going to find this one with a lightning bolt. That is Quick Elevation Edit. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and you can see this green triangle shows up. This green triangle is when it is a narrow triangle like this, it is showing you the elevation at a PI. When it is a more elongated triangle, it is showing you the grade between PIs. So I have my grade here. So I'm going to change this back to 1.5. So I'm back at my original slope, which is 5246.06. So I go to here. I know my slope here. So now what I can do is I can just click in that when I see that elongated triangle, and I'll do minus 1.5, just to keep it consistent, because I don't want to add a grade break if I don't have to. Generally, when you add a grade break, you're going to have to add a label on your plans. That's just going to take up more space and more time. So I'm just going to keep it a consistent 1.5% slope through here. So you can see that it now assigned an elevation for this one. And so that has now allowed me to get those elevations. So I'm going to kind of jump around here because there's a lot of tools and they kind of relate in different ways. But I'm going to go ahead and go to insert elevation point. I can also do PI, but in this case I'm going to do elevation point. Elevation point works the same way as a PI, but a PI is something that you can actually click and drag that grip around and it'll change it. Whereas an elevation point, when you click and drag it, it just moves that point or that grip along your feature line. So I'll show you that here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll turn on my object snaps, select midpoint, and I'll put it in right there. And it will immediately ask me to specify the elevation. I don't know what elevation I want it to be right now, so I'm just going to hit enter. And again, with inserting elevation points, it works the same way as PIs. You can insert them by a specific distance, or you can do it by increment. So I now have this added in. So again, I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'm going to go to this button here. I use this button almost every time I'm doing feature line grading. It is super helpful because in the case where I had my really long road here, I have a lot of vertexes, I have a lot of PIs that I'm going to have to edit elevations, and I always like to put in intermediate points between here. A lot of times when I have a return or like the curve between one section of road to the other section of road, I like to add in these points, intermediate points between the two PIs that I typically have, because that just allows my finished grade surface to triangulate just a little bit better, adds more points and makes a smoother surface. But when I add all those elevation points or PIs, I end up having a lot of them where I have to go through this list and type in 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, and so on. And it just gets time consuming. So the advantage to this button here, set grade / slope across feature line, my apologies, clicked the wrong button. It's set grade / slope between points. So the points being PI points. So I'll go ahead and select this first one, and it asks me specify the elevation, so I know that one's correct. And then I'll sweep along and kind of drag my cursor along, and you can see that it's now highlighting my elevation point I added, and it's highlighting my the end point of my PI, or in this case start point. And I'll go ahead and click at that point, and you can see now all three of those highlighted, letting me know these are the ones that you're going to be editing the grade for, or the slope for. And in this case, everything's sloping down, but I now want it to slope up and start heading up my driveway. So I'm going to go ahead and type 1.5. And so now that I already selected my object to start, selected my points that I want to select, and I hit enter, select the grade, do all that stuff, it's a running command. So now it's wanting me to select an object again so that I could set the grades between 2 points for this additional line. So in this case, I don't want to do any more quite yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. And I'll go back to this quick elevation editor, and you can see that now I have 1.5. I have an elevation of 5245.56 for my elevation point here, and then my last point as well has an elevation. So that was an easy way to add these points. And if I know, let's say, across this curve, let me reload my XREF really quick. Oh, my bad. I had a command running. So I'm going to go ahead and reload that. So let's say I know that I want this to be, let's say, a 1.5% up to this point, and then I want it to be 2% slope from this point all the way up to the top of the road. I can easily use that command to on my feature line to change this from this point all the way through to be 1.5%, and then from here, using the elevation I got there, to continue up at 2%. And there we go. I then now have all of my elevations set all the way up my road. And the nice thing, if let's say I didn't get as high as I wanted my elevation to be higher up, I can then just select this point again, change it to 2% up to this point. Let's say I change it to 2.5% from there to the top of my road. It's as quick as a couple button clicks to edit the elevations across this huge feature line that would otherwise take a very long time if I'm doing it through Elevation Editor or Quick Elevation Editor. So it's a very helpful tool, something I use all the time. So now that's going to be that point. So we have some, so I'm not going to talk about corridor baselines. That is for the next part in this series. I could raise and lower. So if I didn't like the elevation, or let's say I just needed to raise my entire site by a certain amount, like a certain number of feet that I do know, then I could use that button there. I can get elevations from my surface. So I have my existing grade surface, and if I just wanted all of this to match my existing road, I can get elevations from the surface for there. Grade extension by reference, not something I've ever used. I'm sure there are cases where it is super helpful, but you could basically extend further down. Basically, it creates an imaginary extension along at the same bearing as your feature line, and then it uses that as a reference point to set the elevation. Adjacent elevations, so it'll take elevations for adjacent lines. So set elevation by reference. Again, most of these are not things that I often use. The main ones that I would typically use is the Quick Elevation Editor, the set grade between points, and elevations from surface. So that is some of the feature line editing tools. So kind of on to more do's and don'ts. I've heard very conflicting things from other people who are more knowledgeable in grading than I am. Some people have told me that they have no issues with elevation points, and other people have said that it is the worst thing that you can ever use in your drawings. I think in previous versions of Civil 3D, elevation points, these dots, were a cause for corruption within your drawing. When I do use them, I use them very sparingly and in very specific circumstances. I usually only end up using them in these type of curves. And that's about it. Everywhere else, I'll insert a PI point. I think they're more reliable and they're easier to manipulate later on. And kind of going back to elevation points, if I move it around, you can see that it's only dragging it along the feature line. It's not dragging it anywhere else. So that is editing, some do's and don'ts, some tips that I have in terms of grading. So I'm going to get more now into the example portion of feature line grading. So in this case, let's say that I want to start actually doing the grading. So I have all these feature lines created, and I want to actually now add these elevations to these two lines here. So there's a couple different ways that you can go about doing that. One way that I've done in the past is using the stepped offset for feature lines, and then what that does is it allows you to select the elevation offset. So the stepped portion of the stepped offset is that it is now you changed the elevation of that offset line. So sometimes that's nice to do if you know how much you want it to go up or down. So I'm going to do it two different ways here. The other way that I'm going to do is I'm going to let me do a quick offset. So my apologies for being all over the place. So I'm going to do descriptions for curbs. What happened here? Oh man. Okay, unfortunate. Okay, so I had other lines created here, so I'm going to use this as an example for a curb and a curb and gutter. So typically, one thing in feature line grading, you cannot have two feature lines on top of each other. I've kind of gone over that. I've kind of explained that. But you can't have them on top of each other, and you can't have them vertical. They can be on top of each other and be on different sites, but they're not going to be on. You can't have them on the same site and on top of each other. That just doesn't work. That's not how Civil 3D does work. But what you can do is you can create a slight offset in two feature lines and have them at different elevations, and it will then allow you to show that elevation. So to better explain that, I'm going to draw a small little circle here, and I'm going to copy it around to multiple points, and I'll do the same thing for this line. So these white circles that I just drew, these would be feature lines that I would typically draw and use and set elevations to. So if I just have a normal curb where there's no gutter pan for it, I would draw, this would be front face of curb, bottom face of curb, something like that. However you want to explain it or describe it, that's what this would be. So I draw one line for there. Then I would typically, so in the city that I live in, the standard for the shape of this curb would be 1 inch in distance between this point and this point. So, so what I mean by it would be 1 inch this way, in the east-west direction, I guess, if you want to use your view cube. So I would draw this point or this point, whichever one I draw first, and I would either use a stepped offset or another way that I'll show you here momentarily. And then I would have this for my front face of curb is what I'll call it, my top front face of curb. And then this would be my top back of curb. Top back of curb is going to be a very common thing that you hear. That'll be an acronym would be TBC, top back curb. There's also FFC, front face of curb. So that is this type of curb. This would be a median curb, and then this will be a curb and gutter. So this is the gutter pan that water would be flowing through. So this point here, so I draw a point here, point here, point here, and a point there. This is going to be my lip of the gutter. This is going to be, again, my bottom front face of curb, top front face of curb, top back of curb. So I would go through and draw all of these points. So again, there's a couple different ways that I will go about drawing these. Generally, off the top of my head, I almost never remember exactly what the elevation difference between these 2 points is, which makes it kind of difficult because I always know curbs are the height of a curb here is half a foot. But this is just something I have yet to memorize. But for whatever reason, I have memorized that it is an 8.83% slope from here down to here. So how I typically would go about doing this is, I think I figured out what's going on. Thaw those. I'm gonna unload that. There we go. Okay. So now my line should come back. Nope, I guess I deleted them. Anyways, so how I would typically do this. So as you'd seen before, I'm gonna get a little fancy here so that we could see 2 different views. I could explain each point as I draw it. So I have my curb and gutter here. So currently I only have one of these 2 lines drawn. So I'm going to use it as my bottom front face of curb, this red line here. This green line is going to be my lip. And then this magenta line is going to be my top back of curb. So I don't have this point yet, but I will draw that here momentarily. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a polyline from here to here. And this is the other way, not using stepped offset. So I'm going to go ahead and create a feature line from objects, select that line, set it to my feature line grading, erase existing entities, and hit enter. So now, like I was saying before, for whatever reason I've memorized that it is 8.83% slope down from this point to this point. So I'm going to go ahead and, I know from here I have my elevation set, so I'm going to do minus 8.83. And now that gives me my elevation. So one tip that I've been given is when you have your PI points, to typically draw lines like this all the way through. So you would have one here, and basically imagine that we have lines drawn as I'm talking about at your PIs, and you would draw a line like this going from this point to this point, this point to this point, this point to this point. And that way you can use Quick Elevation Editor to just constantly check yourself. I know 8.83%, I have, I believe that's going to be 604% to get my half a foot elevation difference here. It'll be 0% slope here, and so on. So you can quickly go through and just check to make sure. And that's always good to have when you know that it's going to be changing. If you're not sure if it's going to change, you can just use stepped offset to change your elevation points. So now that I have this drawn, I'll go ahead and do, again, I know elevation between points. I have that elevation, and I'll select here. I know I had the lip of my gutter at minus 1.5%. Hit enter, and now using Quick Elevation Editor, I know it's minus 1.5%. That point there, if I were to draw a line and a feature line there, it would more than likely end up being close to minus 8.83%. So now using the stepped offset tool that we have right here, it's going to ask me for offset distance. I'm going to do 0.083, which is 1 inch. And then it's asking me for a side. So we need to ask you for a side. It is a side of the feature line that you're going to offset. So I'm going to select this side because since I have this point, I'm going to offset it on the right side here to get this point. And then my elevation difference, I'm going to type in 0.5 because it's going to be going up by 0.5. and then I'll hit enter. So now we can see if we do quick elevation editor, we have 5245.93 and now it's 5246.43. So if you were to do the math, that ends up being half a foot. And then the last one I'm going to, so I know it's 5246.43 and I'll change this to 5246 point, I don't remember what the elevation is. So in this case, what I'll do is again do a stepped offset. That's why this is super helpful. And again, that's also why doing this method is super helpful and super beneficial. If I already had those feature lines created, I could easily just set a 0% slope. But for this example, I'm not going to do that just for time's sake. And this is going to be, I'm going to do, I believe, let's pull up a calculator, 0.5 minus 0.083, 0.417. So 0.417, I could type, select my side, elevation difference of 0, and now I have my my feature lines. So using knowledge from the previous videos, I'll go ahead and quickly create a surface, and I will name it feet grading EX, for example. I'll set the style in this case to be 1 in 5 design, because design is going to be, because it is my design surface. I'll hit OK. So now I'll go ahead and select my feature lines here and right click, add to surfaces break line, and then it'll give me this window here to select my, or this drop down to select which surface I want to add it to. And then, so I'll select that, hit OK. And if I wanted to, I could add a description. And then I also have these types of feature line or break lines. So non-destructive doesn't change it, but adds a break line to the surface. I'm not going to go into much detail on these, but I'm typically just leave it as standard. Mid-ordinate distance, I'm going to do, for feature line grading, I typically do 0.01 for my mid-ordinate distance. That just allows it to triangulate a little bit more. And then I'll hit OK. And you can see now that it has completely freaked out because my feature lines do not have elevations to them. So I'll quickly add some, and my computer's going to completely freak out. And I'll do 1%. Then again, I'll go over to this one, select that point. I'll go through 1%, hit enter, and then I'll rebuild my surface. So we have this additional section because that's how it is triangulating. But in this case, I'm not going to worry about it. And I forgot to add elevation points for this. Go through 1%. And again, rebuild my surface. So now I'll show you what the surface looks like using Object Viewer. And there we go. Now we have our, this is why I describe it as a piece of paper. So if we had a large rectangle, which I guess I could draw here. Let's just draw it along here, and we'll offset it by 2 feet. That's not nearly long enough. 10 feet. And then again, I'll draw one I guess along this point doesn't really matter. Offset by 10 feet. Fillet radius of 0. And they are not at the same elevation. My apologies, but this should help make it easier to understand what's going on. And let's see, I will create feature lines from objects, hit OK. I will set the elevation to be the same, 5246.06. And then I'll head over to this one. I'll just make it the same, 5245.95, 5245.95. And then I will grade between points. And in this case, I'm not going to change the slope. I'm going to set I'll select elevation, and it's going to give me the elevation of this endpoint that I had selected. So I'll just go ahead and hit enter, enter, and then again I'll add it to surface as break line. 0.01 mid-ordinate distance. Hit OK. And again, with my triangulation, like I was saying before, adding those elevation points allows for more points for it to triangulate. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. And again, rebuild my surface. And I will do Object Viewer. So in this example, let's say this is my piece of paper. And I went through, and let's turn on edges. We could also see our triangles now. So this is our piece of paper along this line. We went through by adding break lines with feature lines. We added a crease or a fold at our gutter lip, and then we went through and we added another fold here for our bottom front face of curb, and then we added another one for top front face of curb and top back of curb. And that is how we ended up getting our surface. So another quick tip that I like to do to make my surface look a little bit fancier is what I'll end up doing is I'll add another point, which is usually about 0.01. So I'll add another point right here. Let me delete that. I'll copy this. So that's my top back of curb. And then I'll add another line. Generally, I offset it by 0.01. It's just a nice number, small number that I like to use. But then I'll drop it by that same, usually by like 1/4 of an inch or whatever it may be. Usually I'll do like 0.1. So again, I'll select my line. I'll do a stepped offset distance of 0.01, and I'll select my side, and I'll drop it by 0.1 or minus 0.1. Then I'll select my object, and you can see they're super close together. I accidentally added 2, so hit escape, delete that one. And now I'll go ahead and add this to my surface as break line. And what that does is it adds more definition to your surface, makes it just a little bit fancier, gives it a little bit more detail. And in the grand scheme of things, you won't really notice. It'll look just fine when you go through and do it. But what that does is it gives you just a little bit more definition. So I'll turn off my edges. But now you can see that we have this little bit of edge, because this is now representing dirt. That's your landscaping or whatever, maybe your sidewalk or whatever it may be. But we now have our gutter, bottom front face curb, top front face curb, top back of curb, and now we have our landscaping area. It just adds that little extra detail that you would typically add at the end when you're done doing your grading, you're doing your final detail work for your surfaces. Okay, so now the last thing that I'm going to talk about is just some things to think about and types of grading that you can typically do. So let me turn on some layers here. Unfortunate. Okay, so let me offset this by 3 feet and 3 feet in that direction, and I'll draw a 2-point circle. Again, 2-point circle. I'll go through and just quickly trim these off. For whatever reason, it is not, oops, it's not liking that. And now just match properties to make it look nice. So now let's think about this as if this were a ditch, like a drainage ditch that you're grading. So what you would typically do is, or how I would end up doing this, is I would create, so if I know the top, I'll set my elevations for the top. And then if you're doing this with feature lines, you'll want to know what your side slope is, and then you can change the elevation for that. So if it's 3:1, you think about rise over run. So it'll be, so it's a 33% slope is what it'll be. So you go over 3 feet, drop a foot, go over 3 feet, drop a foot, whatever that may be. But if we were to end up drawing a section, this would end up, so if we cut a section right here, we would end up having, and I'll draw this out. So this is my, let me just change that to top. There we go. So it looks a little bit better. It's having some issues with it. Anyways, so we have, so this is the side, so that would be this area or this area. And then I now have my edge. And change that to 33, so we have a 3:1 slope. And then again, 33. And I'll just trim this off. So if we were to cut a section where this was the bottom of our ditch, and we had that as our feature line, and then this was another feature line that was at the top of our ditch, this is what the grading would end up looking like. So we have our top, our bottom, and our top again. And that is what it would look like. So that's kind of one way to go about it. There's many different ways you could use grading groups, which is something that I would end up using. Let's say we wanted a retaining wall across our road. So let's say we had 2 degrees. So it's going up, and then we suddenly have it where we want it to be a retaining wall here, something vertical. So again, you can't have vertical feature lines. So I'll draw a circle and I'll offset it by, let's say, 0.25. And then I want my retaining wall to be 5 feet tall. So what I would end up doing is and let's say it is, the wall is 1 foot wide. My apologies, I didn't have this drawn out. A lot of it got deleted for some reason. And I'll do 0.1. So what I would end up doing if I were trying to do a retaining wall out of feature lines is I would end up putting points throughout here. Oops, wrong button, wrong button. What am I doing? Keep hitting every button I don't want to press. I would end up putting feature lines for each one of these points. And again, this last point here, I would only really end up using if I'm just trying to make it just a little bit nicer, make it a little bit fancier. But again, I would have whatever this point, whatever you want to call it, maybe this is a sidewalk or whatever. This would be my bottom of the wall, this would be the top of the wall, this would be the back face of the wall, and then that would be my existing grade or my existing surface. So when you're going through and doing feature line grading, you just kind of sometimes have to get a little creative and think about how the section would look and where you would want to place your feature lines to make it, and where you would want those folds to be in your piece of paper that is your finished grade surface. So with that being said, those were my couple quick examples and ideas on what you would do for feature line grading. That's all I got for this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know if there is anything that I may have misspoke or said incorrectly, or maybe you have some other opinions or other ideas how they could be used. Let me know in the comments. If you have any questions about it, again, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next part, which will be grading groups and the very basics of corridors. Thanks for watching.